Marc Molinaro, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Well, listen, I don't know. You tell me.
I'm going to tell you how you're doing.
Well,
you're doing great.
I appreciate that. Thank you. You tell, being in Dutchess County, so you want to build an arterial. You want to fix an arterial. You want to build a roundabout. You want to build a Stewart's bread and butter shop. You want to build a hospital. It turns into a 2-3 year long fight. Are we alone, or does this happen all over the state and all over the country where we just kind of turn into fighting amongst ourselves?
Well, you're not alone. First of all, I'd say in New York, the process to move projects along like this many times creates adversarialism. But the other, though, is that I'd offer to you when projects are first determined from the top down, you don't necessarily get to build in the local stakeholders and get the involvement.
Right,
I was a local government official for 12 years, a village mayor, and you realize it from day one that the projects that get done are the ones that you start by educating and informing and involving residents at the ground level, right? So citizens in the neighborhood and the block that's being affected, feeling that they have some ownership, and at the end of the day have the opportunity to have their voices heard, that mobilizes the public in a way that's much more productive. But I just will offer it because it's something I'd like to say. But when economic development projects are determined from Albany down, you don't get that local buy-in that you need, and many times they become combative or adversarial.
And I got to tell you, it's a great assessment because it's what's going on here. Certainly, the governor wants this downtown. People aren't arguing over whether or not there should be a hospital; they're arguing over where it's going to be located. Governor's plan is to just in one big swoop with $350 million in state money, they're going to transform downtown, and I think that's you're right. It comes from Albany down, and it creates this unrest, and that's where we are.
You'll have earnest and very honest local officials who want to accomplish these projects. But again, I was listening to your trivia question about Chicago, and I couldn't help but think of the song "Razzle Dazzle." A lot of what economic development is in New York State is, of course, I remember the movie is Richard Gere kind of singing a little "Razzle Dazzle," and then the show picks up and leaves, and the rest of us are at the local level trying to accomplish what someone else promised.
Yeah.
And that becomes very, again, it can be combative and adversarial. I just think at the end of the day, the way you grow jobs and improve the economy is by empowering the businesses, the community leaders, and the citizens at the local level to create the plan, buy into the plan, have ownership in the plan, and ultimately that diminishes the kind of fighting that we see all across the state when projects like this happen.
Well, I'm assuming I know the answer that you're going to give us on this. However, is this a Pataki 2018, a Pataki type year? Where maybe a Cuomo is toppled by an unlikely opponent. What do you think?
I will tell you this. Listen. I'm running for governor. That is fact. I have a long history in local government. I hope it's a year for New Yorkers. I think that we might just have a rendezvous with destiny. That things may just be coming together in a way because people are so frustrated with the government that's not really all that accountable in a state that isn't affordable, and that we're being promised things without ever seeing the ultimate result or the success.
Yeah.
And people are getting frustrated. So perhaps it is.
I want to. Normally, we are so different than downstate. Upstate is so different than downstate. I was listening to an interview just the other day in New York, and the host, the radio host, was talking about how. Listen, we're really lucky here because we have a governor who's really popular. Boy, you could not say that upstate without somebody. You just couldn't say that upstate. The difference between Cuomo's approval rating upstate and downstate is just so different, and we know the population center is downstate. Can you convince them, A, and B, is this Cynthia Nixon? Is she destined to become Cuomo's Bernie Sanders here? Because he seems to be forced to go to the left. What are your thoughts?
Well, the short answer is yes to both questions. But don't and I know you're not, but don't sell upstate short. We have a good number of voters that if we turn out in decent numbers, and we say very clearly that we're going to vote beyond party line because we have kept for the last decade electing statewide leaders that don't understand the real needs of hardworking, overstretched, upstate families and the communities that we live in. So if we're willing to put politics and party aside, upstate has a very strong voice, and it ought to be used. Now, downstate, I would say whoever said that on the radio or on the program it isn't necessarily all that accurate. Cynthia Nixon is the embodiment of the fact that even downstate there is a growing displeasure with the way this governor functions, not the least of which being, again, always sort of trying to outmaneuver the mayor of New York City. And we've seen the deterioration of housing in and around the city. We've seen the deterioration of mass transit in and around the city. So, there is just growing displeasure, and it's because this governor, and I was among them, listen, he came into office, we all thought there'd be a new day in Albany.
Yeah.
Instead, we've had 7 years of this new normal where there's a lack of accountability, there's even a lack of competency at times, and sadly, this culture of corruption that continues to corrode the way decisions are made.
Yeah, it really has to. I don't know how he can escape the corruption that he is, whether indirectly or directly tied to. I want to ask you also, this presence of Nixon in the race here does seem to be moving him to the left. And just recently, and the story came out today about this Independent Democratic Conference, which has been very important for the Senate, for Senate Republicans, which represent upstate. I wonder what your thoughts are. The governor seems to have pushed to bring them back into the fold for Democrats here. What's that going to mean for upstate?
It means that his governing partners in the Senate Republican conference were sold out. And it means that he's had enough with sort of this balance of power in the state legislature, and it can be very threatening to upstate. I recall when the state government was all Democratic control, and it meant that the voices of upstate, despite the fact that there are good, decent senators of both political parties all across the state, but the voices of upstate get drowned out by the needs of downstate, and that can be very frightening. And we saw enormous increases in taxation. In fact, many in the outer suburbs of New York City saw increased transit taxation. I just think that if you want to hold government accountable, you need to have a balance of power. This governor has already weakened the power of the state legislature, and by taking this next step, and almost, by the way, celebrating it like it was the unification of some warring parties.
Yeah.
This is the left and the left being brought back together because he broke them to begin with.
Right. Yeah.
But where is the effort to create one New York government that works and functions by serving all of the people? Instead, we saw a celebration of one Democratic Party, and I'm really not all that partisan. I come from a place when the roof leaks, it leaks on Republicans and Democrats, and our job is to fix it. But there seemed to be this, because of, I think, his primary challenge, this swift push to the left. And all I would say to you is that the rest of the state needs to be concerned about that. You need to have a balance of power. And if the Senate and the Assembly are downstate-focused, Democrat-focused, then I suggest we need a Republican governor.
Let's have you serve partisan just a little bit here. We have been told that Republicans and conservatives will be a unified. This will be a unified movement this year for governor, and that there will be one candidate, no primary. Not sure that that's quite happening, or do you think it's going to happen? For instance, John DeFrancisco doesn't seem to be stepping down at this point. What are your thoughts? You seem to be the front runner right now, though. That's what everybody's saying.
Well, listen. I spent about 2 years traveling the state. In fact, I was running right down the streets of Utica, and I will be doing the Boilermaker again.
Nice.
But I was, trying to earn support. I didn't think it was the right time for me. Today, we have over 50% of the Republican Party support, and Conservative Party support is coming our way too. I don't prescribe what other people should do. I have a great deal of respect for Senator DeFrancisco. I admire him. I think yesterday. And the unification of the Democratic Party in the Senate really puts a lot of pressure on a number of people throughout the state of New York to make sure we have good, strong candidates running in the Senate across the state. I think at the end of the day, we will have a single candidate. I am not going to run a primary. Senator DeFrancisco has said he won't run a primary.
Yeah.
So we'll let the dialogue happen, the people come together, and my goal will just be to earn support. And I'd say this to your listeners. It is more than earning the support of party people. I know what public service is about, and you've got good and decent public servants in and around Utica that do a wonderful job. We have to earn the support of our voters. I don't think this governor's done that, but I know that I'm going to work at it every day.
I want to ask you about education funding. I'm sure you see it in Dutchess County as well. The governor, foundation aid, there's so much that is owed to schools. It places, for instance, our Senator Joe Griffo and Brian Miller in the Assembly. They had to fight for more money for one school district in particular here that was in big trouble, and a very successful school district with a pretty decent property values for upstate New York. This battle year in and year out. I've been doing this job. I'm on my 6th year, and every year we seem to say the same thing. Schools end up getting screwed out of Albany. How do we fund schools properly in New York?
Well, first, understand, we spend an enormous amount of state funding to fund education, and we don't necessarily think nationwide we're getting the highest degree of outcomes. Although we have great schools, I live in a great public school system. My kids go to our public school system. I do think that we need to have a holistic review of the way and the formula that we use to distribute state aid for school districts. We need to talk about how we fund schools at the local level, because we've got to drive down property taxes. And that would be goal number one for me, to ensure that we're providing the highest degree of education, but that we're working to lower the local burden. And I'd get people like Joe Griffo and leadership on the left and the right in the education movement to talk about and evaluate how we collect those dollars, how we distribute those dollars, make sure that poor districts are getting the support that they need.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'd offer that includes an entire review of how we fund special education. The federal government actually should be spending more on special education nationwide. That's about $2 billion in aid that should be coming to school districts across the state of New York. The governor, talked about suing the federal government over tax policy. Well, I'd actually think if we're going to sue over anything, we ought to sue for the dollars that the federal government is supposed to provide for those with developmental disabilities in our public education system. So a wholesale review of that funding mechanism, so that we get a better outcome and that we lift kids up wherever they are in the state of New York.
And I have 90 seconds. You mentioned education, but mental health is also a huge issue right now. We saw another shooting in California. Gun issues. Where are you on the Second Amendment? Where are you on mental health when it comes to guns? What is your take?
I believe in safe protections of those who are law-abiding citizens to own firearm. I also believe, though, that there are smart restrictions to ensure that those with violent behavior don't have criminal violent behavior after due process don't have access to a firearm. But we have to get at the root cause of the problem, and that is by making sure first that our schools are safe, and we have school resource officers that are trained in mental health first aid, that we're really helping young people, in particular young boys, who seem to be dealing with some social emotional issues. And we have to get to the root cause of that, which means, by the way, building up our mental health programming, building up social emotional support, giving the tools and resources to teachers and families to identify kids who are living in despair or living with violent tendencies, to identify post-traumatic stress that may occur.
I have one quick question, a yes or no answer before I go. Would you be for the banning of an AR-15, that type of a gun?
I didn't hear the question.
Would you be against or for banning of a gun like the AR-15?
Listen, I'm happy to have that conversation, but what I know is the minute we ban one firearm, we end up looking to another, and another one gets created.
Got it.
I do want to ensure that there's safe ownership for law-abiding citizens, and I do think anyone who has criminal behavior, violent behavior, ought to be precluded from having access to a firearm.
Marc Molinaro, thank you so much for taking the time. We will do this again. Thank you.
Okay, you bet.
All right. He's running for governor. Might be the guy.